Yes, so let's talk a little bit about Ukraine. Big departure from fairy tales, if you watched that segment yesterday. But
I like that
today,
segment.
thank you. But today we're talking about the Russia-Ukraine war and where we are after the 1 June attack by Ukrainian forces against a bunch of Russian air bases that host Russia's strategic bombing fleet. Now, what does strategic mean? Strategic means capable of carrying nuclear weapons. It doesn't mean that these planes only carry nuclear weapons. They are used for other purposes, launching cruise missiles, things of that nature, regular old-fashioned bombing runs. But the importance of these planes is that they are capable of carrying nuclear weapons, and the use of weapons of systems that can carry nuclear weapons is governed by the START Treaty, the New START Treaty to be accurate. The objective of this treaty is for Russia and the United States to limit the number of deployed nuclear weapons that they have, with a view towards managing escalation and the prospects of escalation. The idea is that both sides have eyes on what each other are doing, and the aim of that is to assure the other side that they aren't planning to launch a surprise nuclear attack on anyone. So that kind of enhanced transparency and enhanced visibility allows the Russians and the Americans to maintain what they refer to as strategic balance. They both know what the other side has deployed. And that then leads to a level of stability because they're assured that they aren't planning sudden strikes on each other. Now, the Russians suspended their participation in the START Treaty in 2023, but only up to a point. The treaty involves a series of regular inspections of the weapons that the other side is doing, the other side holds. It involves regular notifications of planned drills, of planned exercises that involve these weapons, so that nobody's under the impression that a sudden nuclear attack is being launched. But they kept up the bit that says we only deploy a certain limited number of nukes. And that is, I think, the most important part, because it stops the two sides from engaging in a nuclear arms race, and a nuclear arms race can lead either side to take conventional action and can trigger war. If you're worried that one side is planning to nuke you soon, then your best course of action might be to actually initiate a war and take conventionally as much as you can to manage that threat.
My rough understanding of the Cold War is the most dicey bits was whenever it looked like one side might start to get more of an advantage over the other one.
Precisely.
Push things, the Cuban Missile
Precisely.
and whatever else.
Exactly.
One of the things I thought when I saw this, that the talk of nuclear bombers,
yes,
I was thinking it's not 1962. You don't put nukes on bombers particularly. That's the whole point of having a missile program, isn't it?
So you have a nuclear triad, is how it's described.
Okay.
And that involves the bombers, which are part of it.
Still to this day?
Still to this day.
Because I didn't the US end their strategic bomber thing
No.
quite a few years ago?
The B-52s are still there, and the B-2s are still there. These are the jets that are most likely to be used for nuclear attacks. And then there's a range of other jets that are also capable of carrying.
Oh, I know there's loads of other things. Like you can have really tiny tactical nukes. There's even a nuclear artillery shell, right?
Yes.
So I think they even created a nuclear bazooka.
I've
Check it out on Wikipedia. Yeah, the tiniest of tactical nukes. But anyway, if there was going to be a nuclear exchange, Russia would put it on a missile, wouldn't they?
So they would put it on a submarine. It's a triad.
Yeah.
A bomber, a missile, or a submarine.
A missile fired from a submarine still, though.
A missile, as well as missiles fired from submarines. Right. And the idea is that the submarines, because they would survive an attack, give you a second strike capability. Whereas traditionally, the first strike capability would be either aviation or ground-launched missiles. Because it's on a submarine, it's a little bit smaller, more compact, etc. Everything in this domain comes with certain trade-offs. But the key point is that one of the reasons that nuclear-capable jets are kept out in the open, at least according to General Michael Flynn, former national security advisor to the United States, so he would know, is as part of the application of the START Treaty. Because if you put all of your bombers underneath hangars...
Everybody's keeping their cards on the table.
Everybody's keeping their cards on the table, and that gives assurances that you're not planning any nasty surprises.
Yes. Okay, that makes sense.
There is therefore an understanding that we do not muck about with this stuff because that leads to uncontrolled escalation. And so what do the Ukrainians do? They decide to attack the one thing that can cause uncontrolled escalation. Let's have a look at the videos here.
Вот он! Вот он! Коптер опять взлетел. Откуда взлетает, ничего не понятно, блядь. Вот он, клоун, блядь. Оба ни с того ни с сего, сука.
It's a bit, what shall I say, irresponsible?
Ever so slightly.
Yeah, just slightly, yeah.
So this one is more interesting because Russian civilians jumped on the lorries and tried to stop more drones from coming out.
Brave.
Very. And 4 or 5 nuclear bases that host the Russian Air Force, at which there are strategic bombers, were attacked. The reports of the extent of the damage vary quite considerably. The Ukrainians are saying that they destroyed 40 of those, which would be a huge number.
40.
40.
Strategic bombers.
Strategic bombers.
These things cost what? 300 million each or something?
Hundreds of millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions. The Russians do it cheaper. And these, for the most part, are developed in the Soviet era. Right. And they, not everybody is trying to build the fastest possible jet that can deploy nukes because that upsets the strategic balance if suddenly somebody believes that the time to deliver a nuclear weapon has gone from, 3 or 4 hours to 1 hour.
Okay.
The decision-making then becomes much more complex.
So actually this could help Russia because then they can reasonably say, look, we lost 40 bombers, we're going to have to build 40 high-tech ones now.
That becomes part of the dynamic.
Right.
That becomes a possible part of the dynamic.
And they just happen to be a hell of a lot faster and more stealthy than the old ones.
Which puts everybody else in danger. Because one of the things that you want to maintain is a decent, long enough window for you to be able to check with the adversary whether or not our satellites are malfunctioning, to check with your own military, is this actually credible, etc. Yes. So the shorter the time for delivery, the more quickly you must react. The more quickly you must react, the more likely you are to do something reckless.
Chance of error goes up.
Exactly.
Because I thought I heard that the Ukrainians wanted to do a drone strike on the nuke early warning system in Russia.
They did.
The one that wasn't one of the radars facing towards Ukraine.
They did attack one of
the Americans were like, God, don't do that, because if you do that,
they did it.
The things you've talked about.
They did it.
Oh, they did it.
They did attack one of the early warning systems, right, which was, again, an act of gross irresponsibility, because then you're changing the dynamics of the war from being one between Russia and Ukraine to one between Russia and the United States.
Well, I think it kind of
is. And no one comes out. It is by proxy.
Yes.
So everybody uses proxy.
But it's very much in Ukraine's interest to make it overt.
Exactly. So within the sort of established rules of the game, everybody uses proxies against everyone else. That's fine. However, we do not mess around with each other's nuclear capabilities, because the consequences of that are rather more dramatic than arming the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, or supporting the Syrian government, or trying to kick out the French from Africa, as the Russians are doing, or whatever else is being done. So there are layers to this game, and different layers have different rules. So within the lowest layer is to use proxies. And within that, the further away from the other country's borders, the more permissible it is. So you will arm the Vietnamese, or you will arm the Koreans, or whoever, because that's far enough, and Moscow or St. Petersburg or Washington or New York are not at risk. So that's okay. Going right up to Russia's borders, as in supporting Ukraine in a war, that's coming close to a red line within the use of proxies.
Yeah.
Using that to muck about with nuclear stuff, that's insane.
Well,
That's
I mean,
legitimately
just turn
crazy.
this around. Let's say the Russians were sending tens of billions of funding to the Mexican cartels, and the Mexican cartels were doing drone attacks on US nuclear early warning systems. I mean, that would not go down well at all, would it?
No. That would be, everybody would accept that this is extremely reckless, that this is extremely irresponsible, that you're putting the safety of humanity at risk, that you're putting the survival of the species at risk. Everybody would, if it was the other way around, if somebody messed with a British nuclear triad or with the French or with the Americans, there would be wide consensus that this is extremely irresponsible, bordering on insane.
I mean, you don't really need to with the British ones because our submarines should keep breaking down anyway. So.
Which is a slightly different story.
Yes.
But this is what the Ukrainians did. Now, there's another element to this, which is they used civilian trucks to launch these drones from, and civilian warehouses.
And apparently the drivers didn't know.
And apparently the drivers did not know that they were being used in an attack. They, personally, as individuals, you're told to go drive container from A to B. You don't look inside it. That would be breaking the law. You're not meant to look inside it. It's none of your business. You're just carrying civilian goods, whatever the paperwork says you're carrying. However, the Russians also have a pretty sophisticated capability to launch missiles from container ships, as do the Iranians, as do the Chinese, as do the Americans if they wanted to. So it's possible to launch things from containers. It's just understood that you don't play around with the civilian supply chain in this way, because then the entirety of global trade breaks down. If when I see a Chinese ship, I should read it as a military threat, that's it. We're not trading with China anymore.
Yes.
There is no distinction between civilian and military.
Cargo ship come steaming into one of your major ports.
And vice versa. The Chinese would not allow American or British or French cargo ships anywhere near their ports because these containers could be carrying weapons.
As a strategy, this seems to me, I might be wrong, but it just seems desperate now. It's from the Ukrainian point of view. It's so reckless.
Militarily,
that it just feels like it's a last-ditch Hail Mary desperation move.
Exactly what it is, I would have thought.
On one side, it is. On the other side, they're showing the Russians that we can take the fight to you in enormous depth. One of the bases that was attacked was maybe 4,600 kilometers from the border of Ukraine. So this was deep in Russian territory.
How many bases did they hit? And were they
4
all
or 5
simultaneously?
Yes, simultaneously. The Russians are saying 3. There's a reporting of 4 or 5. So there's
a hand it to
picture.
Them. This is a pretty good op. I mean, whether it's wise or not, but it's a good op.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a very impressive operation. It's also dangerous in terms of the nuclear balance between the United States and Russia.
Yes.
There's no way the Russians will believe that either the British or the Americans were not involved in planning and executing this.
Wasn't there a truth social from Trump that you could read it to think, oh yeah, maybe he knew? Something like that.
No, the White House is absolutely denying that they had any idea. Okay. The White House is denying that they knew about this, because for them to admit to knowing about this would be insane. But
aren't the Americans providing all of the intel that lets Ukraine do anything?
The Americans, the British, and the French are all providing intelligence in different ways.
Oh, so actually it could have been so that they might have been relying on the French or the British for this one.
Conceivably.
Right.
Conceivably. But from a risk management perspective, the Russians have to believe that the Americans were involved, and they have to plan some way of retaliating, and they wouldn't retaliate against the US in an open manner. The most likely people to be targeted are therefore the French and the British, and I would argue the British more so than the French, because British intelligence is up to its neck in the Ukraine war, And they and the French have taken the most hardline positions there.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. So what kind of target? I mean,
well,
a mine on a British destroyer in East or something, or
conceivable. I mean, there's always been reporting of a relationship between the Russians and the Yemenis, the Houthi in Yemen, and that would be part of the Russian response to the activity in the Black Sea. They would retaliate in the Red Sea. Both sides would have plausible deniability. So that's one possible area. Another possible area is to, send a truck full of drones and say that it was the Palestine Action Front that was attacking a factory producing F-35s. Or use one of these various far-left loony groups that are operating in Britain and support them to conduct some kind of sabotage attack against energy, against shipping, against aviation, something sort of to extract a similar price.
Yes. So you'd send in an operative to basically take these useful idiots, skill them up.
It's not
provide
difficult
a bit
to
of
use.
Equipment, then disappear.
Exactly.
Let them do it. And the intelligence services, they know that this was a retaliation, but it's not provable, and therefore
everybody would know that this is happening.
Yes.
But nobody would admit that this is happening, because admitting it imposes on you a responsibility to respond. So you don't admit that you know that it was the Russians. The other part to think about is that the normalization of the use of drones and civilian containers in this way means that anybody else can do it now.
I was thinking that you drive a truck into like St James's Park, just behind Downing Street, Whitehall. I mean, if the IRA could fire a mortar into the number 10 back garden back in the 70s from...
Well, when the cabinet...
Dominic Cummings said we've got no defence against drones, really.
You know when the cabinet meetings are, you know which window they're through. You could fly a drone through that, no problem.
So not to encourage this, not to support this, but to say that when you cross these lines, it encourages others to cross these lines. It comes with a price. It comes with a risk. It's not that you do this once and then, okay, you're happy and nothing else is going to happen. It's that when you cross these kinds of lines, there are consequences. The consequences will be hidden from our view. We won't know exactly what's happened. People in the intelligence services will know. They will decide what to say to the public and what not to say to the public, and they will decide how to weaponize the narrative, because we see Keir Starmer saying there's going to be this massive defense expansion, we're going on a war footing, we're getting ready to fight. We know that Whitehall is thinking about conscription. We know that they're thinking about how are they going to use reserves, how are they going to use reservists, etc. And then you do something like this and you hit a key part of the Russian nuclear triad, and then you say, well, why?
I mean, there are a whole bunch of attacks in Britain which have been blamed on the Russians. Now, it's always very difficult to know if they actually were the Russians, because Russia gets blamed for almost everything that goes wrong.
Probably some of them were. So the poisonings and the assassinations, odds are they were. The guys that were supposedly going to see a cathedral in Salisbury and then ended up poisoning a guy and his daughter with Novichok. Yeah, that was, Novichok only comes from a certain number of places.
Let's not forget the polonium-210 in Alexander Litvinenko's system.
Let's not forget that. Although it didn't happen in Britain, though.
I thought it was a teapot in a hotel in London.
Was it?
I think so. I might be getting the details wrong, but...
I might be confused. Okay.
Anyway.
So you see this kind of dynamic going on, and then you see equally dangerous things with the Estonian military, of all people, who don't have a navy, seizing a Russian ship in the Baltics in April. And then you see a response to that. I think this one was the ship that was seized in April, to try to stop Russia from exporting oil, to sort of enforce the sanctions militarily on Russia, essentially. And then the next time the Estonians did this, the Russians sent in a jet, an Su-35, into Estonian airspace to make sure that nobody would dare touch their tankers. So you're seeing the Baltic states, as well as Ukraine, escalating this conflict in a way that risks drawing in the big players. That is the fullness of NATO officially, as opposed to by giving aid to Ukraine. And you see this kind of gambling mindset by two-bit players like Zelensky, like the Estonians, like the Lithuanians, who are risking everybody because they don't like Putin and they have a problem with the Russians. When really, if you're stuck next to a giant like Russia, it's very unwise to provoke it, because even if the big allies come in and help you, the war will happen on your territory with your people as cannon fodder.
Mind you, Zelensky seems to have no problem with using all of his people as cannon fodder.
Exactly. So this risk-taking is very dangerous.
And actually, this war has made Zelensky incredibly rich.
Yes.
So
and
it depends which Estonians you're talking about. Some of them might do incredibly well out of a war.
Yes, absolutely. But at the end of the day, hitting some Russian jets. So the Russians are, it seems that they're admitting to 6 to 12. Or, sorry, they're admitting to 8 to 12 of their bombers being hit.
Still a big number.
Which is still a very significant number. But A, it doesn't do anything to their industrial capability. They can build more of them. And they will be newer and better equipped, etc., etc. And B, it means that they must commit to the war completely. So we saw yesterday negotiations happening in Istanbul, as ordered by Trump, and as Trump keeps on insisting that they must have negotiations and end the war.
Yes, that was the crazy thing, because it was, so this attack happened like a couple of days before peace talks.
One day.
One day. Okay.
One day before the peace talks. And you see this as the Ukrainians saying, well, okay, we're not interested in the negotiations. And if you look at the official positions on the two sides, the Ukrainians are saying they won't recognize any of the captured Russian territories as being now part of Russia, which is really a red line for the Russians. They've taken this territory, they're not going to give it up. And they're seeing that they will insist on joining the EU and NATO, which is the initial cause of the war as far as the Russians are concerned.
The Ukrainians are not even conceding Sevastopol.
And insisting that Crimea will also be theirs.
Okay.
And all they're offering...
bid.
All they're offering is some sanctions relief, conditional that the Russians also pay some compensation for the war.
This is Monty Python and the Black Knight at this point.
More or less. Whereas the Russians are saying that absolutely not. These territories will be ours. The Ukrainians must be disarmed, with enormous limits on the Ukrainian military in terms of size and equipment. And the Ukrainians must maintain neutrality in perpetuity, and NATO and the EU must give written guarantees to that effect. So the positions of the two sides are extremely far apart.
Well, the positions might be different, but the Russians can probably get what they want by just continuing the war.
So there is a realistic, there is a realistic political objective for the Russians to pursue, which is to keep fighting the war until the Ukrainian military breaks, or until they reach Kiev. And now they're launching an attack from Sumy, and that gets them much closer to Kiev and overstretches the Ukrainian forces. For the Ukrainians, there is no realistic objective for them to pursue.
Yes.
That's the most important point. And they tried invading Russian territory in Kursk. If they'd taken Kursk, that would have made no difference.
Yeah.
But they got kicked out, and they got completely defeated, and it cost them a huge amount of territory in the Donbass itself. So,
I mean, all credit to them. They've been bloody tenacious. They've had it a lot longer than I would have thought. But they are just chewing through men and not gaining anything.
And they are doing things that risk the safety of their backers. That's what I think is the most important point. There's a level of recklessness in the pursuit of this war that's really, really dangerous.
We've been complaining about what appears to be the intentional degradation of our educational system for years now. If you went through the state school system in the UK, as I did, you will know exactly what I mean. Just listen to the man in the street interviews from the 1960s compared to those done now, and it is crystal clear that those people then have something that we don't have now. Put simply, we're being dumbed down by the powers that be on purpose, but we don't have to accept this perpetual lowering of standards. We are still a free people, and it's time to do something about it. This is why we have created courses.lotuseaters.com, a platform on which we are now offering courses which are tailor-made to reconstruct the education that has been denied to us. The first course we have available is Dr. Nima Parvini's excellent Trivium, a tripartite course consisting of logic, grammar, and rhetoric, which is the foundation and backbone of a classical education. This course will make you a better writer, speaker, and thinker, and it used to be that every 12-year-old in the country would take it. Personally, I will be doing this course with my own children to ensure they get the benefits of it for their whole lives, but it's never too late to do it, and I really think you should. We will also be producing many other courses in the future on subjects which are not topics of idle interest, but which instead will level you up as a person and make you more effective in the real world. I want to be clear, these are not YouTube videos. They are university-level lectures and coursework with a test at the end to which you will have to apply yourself. In these, we are not offering you an easy life. We are offering you the foundations of what you will need to be a part of the ascent of our civilization out of the hole that was dug for us. They are not easy, but they are rewarding. They are an investment in yourself that will provide you with skills that you will use for the rest of your life. Courses.lotuseaters.com. We will see you there.